Hello and welcome to Moments in History. I'm Linda Shenton-Matchett, author, speaker, and history geek. While researching my stories, I unearth tons of intriguing historical information that doesn't end up in my books. So I've created this channel to share these tidbits with you, and I really appreciate you stopping by to watch. Operation Magic Carpet. The American military's ambitious plan to get the more than 8 million men and women stationed across the globe home alive by 45. Then there were the war brides and their dependents who expected to join their husbands sooner rather than later. However, for these individuals, mostly women and hence the moniker, the greatest hurdle for legal entry into the U.S. was the quota system, or the National Origins Formula established by the Immigration Act of 1924. The act all but cut off entry for many hopeful migrants from Europe and all would-be immigrants from Asia, slowing immigration to a trickle with all Asians other than Filipinos, barred and strict quotas set for specific countries based on 2% of the U.S. population, made up by that country as represented in the 1890 census. Dating back to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which offered a racially construed solution to preserve both the ideal of American homogeneity and to bar so-called undesirable elements, the 1924 Act was only one of many such pieces of legislation. But GIs demanded the right to bring home their new wives and sweethearts, many hailing from countries prescribed by the 1924 Act. In recognition of China's fight against the Japanese, the Chinese Exclusion Repeal Act of 1943, also known as the Magnuson Act, passed in December of 1943 and allowed a small number of Chinese immigrants legal entry into the United States. 2 years later, 59 Statute 659, known as the War Brides Act, was enacted on December 28th of 1945, aimed to, quote, expedite the admission to the United States of alien spouses and alien minor children of citizen members of the United States Armed Forces, end quote. Through this act, war brides and their dependents were exempted from the quota systems of the Immigration Act and granted free passage to journey to their new homes. The act was bolstered by the subsequent Alien Fiancés, spelled for the women, and Fiancés, spelled for the men, Act of 1946 and 1947, while the restrictions of the Immigration Act were further weakened by the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. Finally, the Immigration Act was finally replaced with the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which eliminated the National Origins Formula altogether. Due to the logistics and distances involved, many war brides and their families languished for months and sometimes even years before coming to America. Given the United Kingdom's special relationship with the U.S. and the sheer number of Americans who were stationed there during the war, it's unsurprising that the first group of war brides to arrive in the U.S. hailed from that country. 452 British women, 173 children, and one lone bridegroom left Southampton in the south of England on January 26, 1946, and arrived in the U.S. on February 4, 1946. The group, like most war brides, traveled to the country by ship. The first group used the ship SS Argentina, which was an ocean liner that had been converted to a troop transport. The provisions of the War Bride Act also made exemptions for displaced or orphan children adopted by American servicemen and women to be granted free passage to their new homes. Interestingly, as early as 1942, a newspaper in Northern Ireland, the Ballymena Observer, mentioned the possibility of women from the United Kingdom marrying American soldiers who had arrived in Belfast in January of that year. The Roman Catholic Church in the country also chimed in and reminded its congregants that United States citizenship was not automatic after marrying an American soldier. As the war continued, other newspapers picked up the theme and indicated that not only would a GI bride not be entitled to American citizenship, nor entitled to swift passage back to the U.S., but her potential husband would also have to gain the permission of his commanding officer 3 months in advance of the impending nuptials. 2 years later, Curtis Hamilton, a writer, would explain the necessity of American soldiers obtaining the consent of his colonel or risk severe penalties. Hamilton also indicated that the wedding must first be conducted at a British registry office because U.S. chaplains were not able to conduct marriages on British soil. Only then could the couple have their religious ceremony. In an effort to assist the newly minted bride or engaged woman, the American Red Cross distributed a book entitled How America Lives, which provided information on, quote, American ways of running a house, cooking, clothes, and so on, unquote. Classes were also held each month at the famous American Red Cross Rainbow Club near Piccadilly, the idea being that the women could get to know each other and perhaps not feel too much alone in their new homes. Lectures were presented about the American social life, housing, health, education, cookery, clothes, housekeeping, and babies, followed by an extensive Q&A session. In another article, British women were told they would have to wait 3 years and take an educational test to show they could read and write and understood the groundwork of American history, facing such questions as, how many states are there? And how often is the president elected? But that naturalization study courses would be available to help them prepare for the test. Precise totals are hard to determine, but it is estimated that more than 1 million American soldiers married foreign women from 50 different countries. Approximately 100,000 British women, 150 to 200,000 from continental Europe, 16,000 from Australia and New Zealand, as well as brides from non-Allied countries, with 50,000 to 100,000 from Asian countries alone, and nearly 15,000 German brides, including those who had been prisoners, slaves, and concentration camp survivors. Relationships with Japanese women faced issues of racial bias from both sides, much like the prejudice African American servicemen encountered when they dated and married white women in Europe and elsewhere. Not all war brides had good experiences. Some arrived in the U.S. to find that the palatial homes described by their GI husbands were farms without electricity or indoor plumbing, or tiny homes crowded side by side. Others were trapped in abusive marriages that they didn't leave for fear of losing their children. However, for the most part, war brides adjusted to their new lives and their adopted country. Some sent money and goods home while keeping in touch through organizations such as the Transatlantic Brides and Parents Associations, which formed overseas to help the parents of the war brides arrange air travel to visit their children in America, and within the U.S. for brides to gather and support one another. Eventually, these women blended into society and became Americans. I hope you've enjoyed today's moment in history. If you'd like to learn even more history, please stop by my blog, found on my website at www.lindashentonmatchett.com. And please consider subscribing to my channel and click the bell icon to receive notifications of new episodes that release on the second and fourth Friday of every month. Thank you for watching, and have a great rest of your day.